Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome to this final Sunday afternoon talk of the Rains Retreat this year. Today is the full moon day, the Pavarana day, the ending of the rains, even though the rains have far from ended. The sky is still delivering very vigorously. So the theme for today is two parts. The place of non-abiding and not in my backyard. So the former of those is more of a Buddhist phrase, something you'd find in Dhamma teachings. The second one is more what you'd find in local conversations. And the expression of that's often used is someone who is a NIMBY, which is an acronym for not in my backyard. So the title came from the many suggestions that people made at the beginning of the Rains Retreat. I put out the word to say, please offer suggestions for talks on Sundays. So these were actually two separate ones, but I put them together as I thought they worked well as a sort of contrasting pair of attitudes in terms of the feeling of where we belong, or the sense of where we are in life, or where we want to be in life, or our place in the world. In Buddhist teachings, Buddhist practice, then the Buddha usually starts off with the bad news first, so that almost all of the Buddha's lists, it starts off with a thing which is unwholesome or obstructive or difficult or coarsest first, and then goes on to the more refined or more liberating. So like with the Mangala Sutta, asevana cha balanang panditanang cha sevana, not to associate with fools but to associate with the wise, this is the highest blessing. Or the Bala Pandita Sutta, the fools and wise people. So I'll start off with the Bala, the foolish view, first of all, and get on to the Pandita, or the wise view afterwards. So the not in my backyard, NIMBY, this is an attitude that is, say, common enough, ordinary enough in the world, and it's an expression and a way of our own habits of self-interest, self-concern, this way that we have of thinking that's very natural, very ordinary, but as I like to point out, not everything that is natural is helpful. Like violence is natural, selfishness is natural, jealousy is natural. You know, they're natural, but they're part of the world. But if they are followed, then the result is painfulness and difficulty, agitation and confusion for ourselves as individuals and the people around us. So I think it's helpful to understand that all of us have those kind of territorial instincts, my place, my spot, my say, zone that I need to protect. And that's a very, very ancient conditioning that we have from our ancestors way back into the beginnings of the animal world, many hundreds of millions of years into the past, literally, you know, within this process of evolution, that even tiny creatures will have a territory that they want to defend. And so we inherit that attitude. So that is an influence on our mind. Even when you're a spiritual practitioner, you know, maybe a dedicated meditator. Yeah, I have known people, not mentioning any names, but people who have been meditating for decades, and they have come to start a 10-day retreat here, and they've chosen their mat, their spot in the shrine room, and they put their shawl down, and they've got their chanting books arranged just how they like, and then someone moves their mat by about 4 or 5 inches, and then the person is ready to pack up and go home. How dare you? You moved my mat. Incandescent with rage, literally. Just incredibly upset because somebody moved my cushion, someone moved my mat. And of course, I would never feel like that. But that's a joke. Because all of us have those kind of feelings, like, how dare you? Who moved my mat? That's my stuff. Where's my teacup? My teacup is gone. Everyone knows that's my teacup. Where's it being put? Someone's taken it. So those feelings of territory, my spot, my place, this is an expression of self-interest, self-concern. So I feel it's important to respect that. You are not necessarily taking it personally, but we recognize this is part of our human makeup, that this is what we live with. Even if we might think of ourselves as an experienced practitioner or a Buddhist, you wouldn't think of your sitting mat being some part of your territory. But notice those feelings of rage when someone does move your mat. And or even worse, takes your walking meditation path, when you have your path that you like to walk on, and that someone else comes out, you come out onto the field here on a retreat, and someone is on your path, and you're trying to debate whether you should stand close by and look kind of like with the little sign, giving all the signals that you can that you're on my path. So I'm kind of making fun of it, but it's because we all do this, and I've certainly had these experiences myself, and so I feel it's important to respect that this is part of the natural order. But just because something is natural doesn't mean that we need to be subservient to it. We don't have to be dominated by that. And in our modern times, this sense of self-concern, or what they call the cult of the individual, the sort of me being important, me being special, me and my stuff, me and my things, me and who I am, that is getting kind of stronger all the time. And probably most of the people who come here are not addicted to social media, and there's probably not too many people with their own Instagram pages or Facebook followings. But that is very much part of our age, and that sense of me and who I am, and I'm special, I'm different. This is my stuff, how I present myself to the world, how I want to be seen. All of that contributes to this feeling of individuality and separateness, and along with that being something that is got a value in society. Being a strong individual, being competent, being someone who is ready to help and to share, being someone who knows what they're doing. Those aspects of self, independence and strength and self-reliance are something that is helpful. But when that slips over into I'm more important than you, then it becomes problematic. It becomes difficult. So this sort of "not in my backyard" is. It's a classic expression. Any of you who have ever lived in British towns, villages, had to apply for any kind of planning permission yourselves, or someone nearby you has applied for planning permission, you say, I think it's very good, it's very important that we have those shops, but not on my street, or not next door to my house, or not in my backyard. I'm really interested in supporting immigration, but not in Great Gadsden. And so that is a powerful instinct. So not in my backyard is that the recognition that yes, it's important that there is a place for people who are immigrants, or people who want to have shops or businesses, or they need to have these kind of activities or services, but somewhere else. Not in my backyard, or not in my family. So that say self-interest, it can occupy a lot of our life. And even though we can back that up with our thoughts, we can come up with a good reason. You can go up to the local planning hearing and say exactly why it shouldn't be in your backyard. This reason, this, all kinds of good explanations. We can be not acknowledging that feeling of, I don't want it. This is invading my space, and I don't want it. I don't like it, and it shouldn't be happening to me. So that it's understandable, but the more that we follow that habit of self-interest, that foolish attitude, that bala, a kind of a foolishness, then we create a lot of loneliness, insecurity, and an alienation, that we find ourselves clashing with the world, because my interest, my issues, my problems are more important than yours, and the result of that is a sense of being pressured by the world, or being at war with the world, fighting with the world. So it's very, even though we want security, we're creating the conditions for insecurity. We want strength, but we're creating the conditions for being fragile. One story that comes to mind in this respect is many years ago I lived in California, and this was before Abhayagiri Monastery opened up. So I used to stay in various places in San Francisco. They would the group there would rent an apartment, and I would stay for a few months. And I would give talks and have Dhamma evenings and run retreats and so forth in the area. And one of the people who was regular member of the Buddhist group, she always seemed to be having a lot of difficulties. She had a terrible bicycle accident. She had a head injury, and she seemed to be having one difficulty after another, clashing with her neighbors. And I would hear these stories and think, oh my goodness, she's really unlucky. What a difficult life she has. Like, oh, poor thing. This is a life that's really blighted, really burdened with so many unfortunate accidents. And then I went to I'm not trying to make fun of her or sort of pick her out, but it was I felt a very good example of the human mind. And so she invited me to have a meal at her home one day, and she had a nice little house with a very small backyard. And so I was sitting in the shade of the back of the house, having the meal outside in the garden area, and the garden was paved, and she had these pot plants along one side of the garden, and she said, "I'm suing my neighbor because he won't cut the branches on his tree." And I said, "Oh, well, why is that a problem?" She said, "Well, because there's casting shade over my plants." And I thought, I'm missing something here, because they're all in pots, and the space on the left-hand side of the garden, as I was looking at it, was quite empty. And the space on the right was where all the pot plants were, and the shade from the branch was over on the right. I said, "Forgive me for asking, but why didn't you just move the pot plants over to the other side of the garden, and then you wouldn't have to take your neighbor to court?" She said, "Well, I want them there. That's where they belong. They should be there." So I thought, okay, I'll try that again. And I thought, well, but surely, going to a court case, and you haven't got much money, and it's expensive, and all the stress of being in conflict with someone. Well, no, he should just cut the branches on his tree. It's shading my garden. They shouldn't be there. And I could feel this sense of, oh, okay, I understand why there's so many conflicts in this good person's life, is because of that sense of, oh no, it should be this way, and my way of doing it, it's like this. It's got to be in this way, otherwise that's wrong and bad. So this attitude of not in my backyard, it's based on self-concern and also a rigidity of views, a sense of fixed opinions, that it has to be this way. It has to be exactly like I want, otherwise it's bad and wrong. So the Buddha's teaching talks about this kind of area of our life. The two particular words he uses, ahankara, which means made of I am. Ahang means I am, kara means to make. So I amness, ahankara, the I am feeling. And then its partner is mamankara, which is mama is mine. Mamankara means made of mineness. So the feeling of I-ness and the feeling of mineness. Ahankara, mamankara, easy to remember. So these are the troublemakers. This is what sort of drives the NIMBY attitude and the habits of self-concern. And once again, it's natural enough and it's common enough, but even though these feelings might arise, like, but it is mine, and I am this. It should be this way. This is my territory. They shouldn't do it in my backyard. Yeah? That the fact that arises, that attitude arises in the mind, doesn't mean that it has to be followed. And so the Buddha pointed to these habits of thinking, ahankara, mamankara, as something which is really obstructive and dangerous and causing of difficulties. Another teaching that he gave, where he talks about this kind of self-interest or self-importance of how much the mind can inflate what I think, who I am, to a ridiculous extent. There's a whole section of the Samyutta Nikaya called the Labha Samyutta, which is about, Labha is gains or wealth or prosperity. And so the whole section of these connected discourses is about the dangers of success, if you like. And so there's one particular sutta, it's called the dung beetle, which maybe people have heard of, but the Buddha is quite pointed in his example, because as you might imagine, particularly in Asia, India and Asia, the dung beetle does not have a very high status in society. You know, you spend your life collecting dung, and it's a very sort of coarse image. He said, dreadful indeed are gains, honor and renown, being praised, getting titles, being wealthy, having a lot of prestige, having a lot of money, being a powerful person. He says this is dreadful. This is really a problem. So it gets people's attention right from the word go, because generally we think it's a good idea to be rich and powerful and wealthy and to have titles and such like. He said this is dreadful, having gains, honor and renown. He said it's like a dung beetle that collects its ball of dung, and this dung beetle thinks this is the biggest ball of dung in the whole garden. No one's got a bigger ball of dung than I have. This is the most impressive, fantastic ball of dung, and is really proud of their dung ball. He said this is someone, a monastic, a wanderer, a priest who is proud of their status or proud of their position or proud of their power in society. Is just like a dung beetle saying, "Look at the size of my dung ball. Look how impressive my dung ball is." So it's a very kind of pointed and kind of attention-getting simile that the Buddha uses. But he uses that kind of shocking language to get our attention. And so that when we are listening to those reasonable voices, like, yeah, well, not in my backyard, or it really shouldn't be this way. Well, I'm an important person, and how dare they treat me like that? I mean, really, don't you know who I am? Yeah. And so he uses that kind of language to say, this is just like a dung beetle saying, don't you see this is the biggest dung ball in the whole garden? So there's another set of qualities where the Buddha talks about these areas where we create the sense of self, and I like to reflect on these a lot, because these are mentioned by the Buddha right in his early teachings in the Anattalakkana Sutta. Actually, we chanted that yesterday evening. There was the evening puja yesterday, the discourse on not self, and in that the Buddha's advice to his first 5 disciples, that when they heard his teachings and all 5 of them realized full enlightenment, this is one of the things that he points out, is around how these feelings of self are created by the mind attaching to, clinging to the body, to feelings, perceptions, ideas and emotions, opinions and consciousness. And he says that the mind that thinks, etang mama, this is mine, eso hamasmi, this is what I am, eso me atta, this is myself. This is the real engine of trouble. That's where that whole, those feelings of alienation and insecurity, how we end up making life much worse for ourselves. We want security, but we're creating the causes of insecurity. We want strength, but we're creating the causes of weakness. We want independence, but we're creating the causes of of dependence. So these three, you can think of them as three ways that we create ourselves. So the first one, these are called, if you want the Pali word, these are called the papancha dhammas, or the causes of complication. So the first one is about craving, tanha, etang mama, this is mine. So you can call that the owning self, the feeling of I own this. This is my seat. This is my book. this is my yarn. This really is mine. I've had this since 1986, so I've had that for over 30 years, 33 years. Ajahn Amaro made it. It's mine. It's really mine. But even though Ajahn Amaro made it, and I've had it for over 30 years, that the mind that says that really is mine, as soon as it goes missing, or it gets burnt in a fire, or gets lost in a flood, or whatever, or someone steals it, then it's not mine anymore. That mineness is something that the mind is adding to it. So there's the owning self. That feeling of I, which is the owner, owning the body. This is my body, this is my monastery, these are my robes. That the I that is the apparent owner, that's the first one. So that's tanha, or craving, that's connected to. The second one is mana, which is conceit. I am this, I am a man, I am a woman, I am English, I am German, I am Belgian, I am Thai, I am French, I am Swiss. Yeah, I am old, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm a monk, I'm a layperson. Yeah. All of those I ams. The feeling of I, the being, and I, the doing. I am talking. Or you might think, I am listening. The I, which is the doer, the being, that is the second kind. That's the mana, or conceit, the being self, if you like, or the doing self. And then the third one is to do with views, ditthi, the opinions. And so that's what we can call the narrative self in Western psychology. That's the story that we say. I was born in 1956. My mother was Pat Horner. My father was Tom Horner. And at the end of this month, if my mother was still alive, it would be her 99th birthday. So that's the narrative self, my story, where I come from, where my address is, what our occupation is. So when people say, well, who are you? Then we launch into the narrative self, right? We don't just say, I am. Maybe you do. But that you can think of as the narrative self. So the more that we get to know those ways that the mind creates I and me and mine, the owning self, the being self, the narrative self, then the more it can be recognized, oh, this is just the mind creating stuff. This is just what the mind is adding to these impressions of feeling, remembering, thinking, smelling, tasting, touching. And the feeling of, this is my space, this is my home, this is my cushion, this is my monastery, my kuti, that my home, that owning self, to be able to recognize, well, that's just a conventional truth. It's just something that is spun into existence by a set of human agreements. Up until 1984, this was not Amaravati. This was St. Margaret's School. And up until 1938, this wasn't St. Margaret's School. This was St. Margaret's Farm, until the government bought a chunk of the farm off the neighbours, Mr. Blaine's, and said, we're going to turn this into a summer camp. And before that, and before that, and before that. So where are we? What is this place? This is our place because the English Sangha Trust has got a signature on a piece of paper lodged with the government, so it's our place. But that is only a set of human agreements. If you ask the squirrels, or the magpies, the pigeons who live here, about who owns this place, well, of course, the magpies, this is my place, or the robins, each robin knows their territory, and the magpies and the pigeons and the squirrels. The squirrels know where they've buried all their nuts. They've been very busy. they set their store for the winter. So their map of this place is very different from ours. They don't have a title deed with Dacorum Borough Council, but they know these hazelnuts are buried here, and these chestnuts are buried there. So the Buddha encourages this active exploration of looking at how the mind creates this sense of owning my place, my stuff, who I am, and says, and basically encourages us to question that. Is that so? Is that a sure thing? Is that the whole story? And then when the mind can recognize that can only be a conventional truth, it can only be a human agreement, it's just a designation that we think into existence, then the heart can be free from that. You can use those designations, those forms, but we're not limited by them. And to get on to the other part, the Pandita side of the equation, so we have the Bala, the kind of the foolish side, so then the other perspective, the place of non-abiding. So for some of you that might be a familiar expression, for some of you not so much. There's one of Luang Por Chah's Dhamma Talks in this book called The Taste of Freedom. The talk is entitled No Abiding, so that's very well worth looking up and reflecting on. And that is an expression that Luang Por Chah used a lot, no abiding. And there's various different ways that he spoke about it or encouraged it. So there's one particular encounter describes how a Westerner came to visit Wat Pah Pong, to Ajahn Chah's monastery, and was asking a number of questions. And amongst what this person asked, they said, how old are you? Do you live here all the year round? And Ajahn Chah's response was, I don't have any age and I don't live anywhere. Now, Buddhist monastics, we're not allowed to lie. We're truth tellers. So it's important and interesting to reflect. So what did he mean? He had been staying at Wat Pah Pong as his main place of living since 1954, when he walked into that forest and hung up his umbrella and his mosquito net near to his home village. And so then Wat Pah Pong grew up around him, but since 1954, then most of the time he had lived in that forest. So what did he mean when he said, I don't live anywhere? And also, what did he mean when he said, I don't have an age? So in that respect, he goes on to explain, if you have an age, if you have a place, then you're somebody, and if you're somebody, you have a self. If you have a self, that's where all the trouble begins. So don't have a self. Don't create the trouble. Don't relate to your life in this way. So he wouldn't be denying that the body was born and has been around for a certain number of years, but what he's speaking from is in a way, it's a real Dhamma desana. It's a demonstration of Dhamma. It's like the voice of the Dhamma speaking. Like the Dhamma doesn't have an age. The Dhamma is timeless. It's unborn, unaging, unailing, undying. The Dhamma is timeless. It's unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed, amata, deathless, amata. And so that to say, I have no age, is like saying the Dhamma has no age. And then I don't live anywhere. It's like, the body certainly might be parked in a particular spot. At Wat Pah Pong, it's the forest outside of Bangkok village in Ubon province. But what's that got to do with anything real? The perception of the body moving around is one thing, but to say, I live here, or this is my place, one doesn't have to have that attitude. The other example that comes from that talk, No Abiding, that Ajahn Chah would speak about, he said, as human beings, we love to have a place. We love to define ourselves as being something. We attach, we cling because of that sense of defined being something, having something. We love that. But the Buddha Dhamma teaches us not to cling, not to attach, not to identify. And he was sitting, when he was giving this talk, he was under his kuti, and so In Thailand, as probably many of you know, most of the buildings are up on stilts above the ground. At least they were in those days. So he'd be talking to people sitting on the ground underneath the kuti with on this bench he would sit on, and people would gather around on this cement floor. And he'd say, this floor here is an abiding. This is a dwelling place. And then the floor above, in the room above us, in my kuti, that floor is an abiding. But in between the two, you can't stand there because it's just space. He said, and people don't understand what that means. He said we say that space which is non-abiding, which is not a place to be born, and not a place to land, not a place to abide. We say this is nibbana, or this is emptiness, and people back off. They go, "Oh, well, that sounds kind of weird," or "I don't like that," or "Oh, I can't relate to that." But he said that's exactly what we mean by nibbana, is that place of no abiding, that place of undefined being, not having a thing that you are, or a place where you are, or not being a person, not being any place, not being anything. And even as I say those words, probably a few of us are going, "Ooh, doesn't sound very nice. Can I take my dog? Will I see my friends again?" Or if I don't, and that would frequently be the response when people would say, "I don't want to go to Nibbana because I couldn't have my mum and dad with me, or I couldn't take the dog." It's more of a British thing. So the people feel challenged there, but it's also important to question that. What is it that's challenged? And if we explore that, if we reflect on that, what is it that feels a sense of loss, or like that sense of difficulty, or being challenged, or being thrown off balance by the idea of non-abiding, or no place to stand, or not being anything? Because to our ego, that seems like death. Undefined being to the ego seems like death. And so we want to have something, not necessarily something that's sort of particularly glorious or satisfying. It's not like we want to win a prize, or have lots of money, or have hundreds of friends. Even having a problem. How many of us have had the experience whereby you've been working on something, going through your list of emails you've been replying to, or tidying up around the house, and you finally get to the end of your job and you go, right, thank goodness that's done. Last email sent, house finally cleaned, okay, the washing up's done, everything's put away. Then 1, 2, 3. You don't get to more than about 5 seconds before you go, we feel insecure. We want we don't know what we are. And then suddenly we realize, oh, there's another 10 emails I haven't replied to. Oh, there's the other room. I still haven't tidied that up. Oh, there's the attic. So it's an extra job. It's another thing for us to do, but we feel relieved because I can exist in relationship to that. Does that make sense? I'm not reading anybody's mind. This is statistically likely. This is statistics, not psychic power. So if you're thinking, how did he know? It's like, because we're all like that. So that the ego experiences undefined being as death. But if we're not dominated by egotistical thinking, by those habits of self-view, that ahankara, mamankara, then undefined being feels like freedom. It's a relief, it's a joy. The Buddha wouldn't have praised Nibbana as the highest happiness if it was a problem, right? If it was a state of lack and death and a state of diminution, the Buddha wouldn't have said this is the highest happiness. He wouldn't have praised this as the goal of the holy life, right? Another of the expressions that Ajahn Chah used, in fact, I often quote this. This was the very last piece of advice that he gave to Ajahn Sumedho, and this was in a letter that he wrote during the Rains Retreat of 1981. And I was we were all at Chithurst in that year. There one or two branch monasteries. So most of the community here in the UK lived at Chithurst. And this letter arrived from Thailand, and it was written in the hand of one of the Western monks, and he'd been staying with Luang Por Chah up at Tham Sang Phet Monastery, where Luang Por Thun, who's the elder monk who's staying here, this rains retreat, where he's the abbot. So Ajahn Chah was staying up at Tham Sang Phet. It's on a hill, and the air was a bit fresher, and it was a bit more of a quiet environment for him. And this particular Western monk was staying with Luang Por Chah at Tham Sang Phet, and he said, Ajahn Sumedho, you're not going to believe this, but Luang Por asked me to take his dictation today and to write you a letter. So here I am. And so he'd faithfully copied down what Ajahn Chah had said to him. And he said, so the instruction from Ajahn Chah to Ajahn Sumedho was, and this was because Ajahn Chah realized his health was rapidly collapsing. And as it turned out, he had a stroke and was brain damaged just a few weeks after he wrote this letter. So he was right in that estimation. And the advice he wrote in that letter was, whenever you have feelings of love or hate for anything whatsoever, these will be your aids and partners in building paramita, in building spiritual qualities. The Buddha Dhamma is not to be found in moving forwards, nor in moving backwards, nor in standing still. This, Sumedho, is your place of non-abiding. Full stop. That was it. So I feel that was extremely powerful and significant advice, because if you can think, well, if you're the teacher and you got your chief Western student is starting a new monastery in the West, and they've got all these different issues they've got to work out and ways to set things up, and you think they give okay, Sumedho, my health is fading, and here's a list of things to do. Do this, 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 and don't do that, or that. But there was none of that. It was this overarching instruction is just this principle of whenever you have feelings of love or hate for anything whatsoever, they will be your aids and partners. They will be your teachers, your ajahns. Whether you love it or you hate it, it's your ajahn. And what helps you to build paramita. The Buddha Dhamma is not to be found in moving forwards, nor in moving backwards, nor in standing still. This is the place of non-abiding. So in that respect, then Ajahn Chah is quoting a passage from the suttas, and also he would put that as a question to people who came to visit him quite often, and so that it's quite a natural part of the style of many forest ajahns, and probably other Buddhist traditions too, that a teacher will have a particular theme that they develop for a few years at a time. So for a number of years, when people came to see Ajahn Chah, he would ask them this question. Say, if you can't go forwards, and you can't go backwards, and you can't stand still, where do you go? And they say, well, you dig a hole, you go sideways, climb a tree, get in a balloon. But he said, no, you can't get in a balloon, you can't dig a hole. Going sideways doesn't work either. You can't go forwards, can't go back, can't stand still, can't go up or down or to the side. Where do you go? And so, as long as we think of what we are and our place in the world in terms of I am an individual existing in time, traveling through space, then there's no solution. There's no way of solving that puzzle. If I am this person existing in time and in three-dimensional space, then you can't go forward, can't go backwards, can't stand still. There's no possibility. So what it's pointing to is that dimension of our being which is outside of time, outside of place, which is unlocated, which is free of identity. So it's challenging the mind to let go of self, to let go of time, to let go of location. So those are what we think of as who we are. I am a woman, I am a man, I'm an Amaravati. It's Sunday afternoon, it's October the 13th, this is today, this is me, this is my place. And so that's our normal conditioned way of thinking. But as long as we take that to be who and what we are, that's directly investing in self-view, sakkaya ditthi. And so it's only by letting go of that, letting go of self-view and conceit, these seeing through these habits of I-making and mind-making, that the heart can be freed. It's only by recognizing there is that dimension of being which is unborn, undying, unoriginated, uncreated, and unformed, which is neither a going forwards, nor a going backwards, nor a standing still. So this is a book on Nibbana, Ajahn Pasno and I put together a number of years ago, called The Island. And so there's a couple of passages here that in Luang Por Chah's expression of you can't go forward, you can't go back, you can't stand still, then he is somewhat paraphrasing or making a short version of this particular teaching. So this is the chapter 8 of the Udana, the Buddha's inspired utterances, Sutta number 1. There is that sphere, that ayatana, that mode of being, where there is no earth, no water, no fire, nor wind, no sphere of infinity of space, of infinity of consciousness, of nothingness, or even of neither perception nor non-perception. There is neither this world nor the other world, neither moon nor sun. This sphere, this ayatana, I call neither a coming nor a going nor a staying still, neither a dying nor a reappearance. It has no basis, no evolution, and no support. This, just this, is the end of dukkha. So for some of us, they might feel like, no sun, no moon, oh. No earth, water, fire, and wind. Oh, that sounds pretty lonely. And I like the stars. The sun is beautiful. Even the autumn rain. You know. And so again, what is it in the heart that goes? But why would the Buddha say this is the end of suffering? Also, the Buddha was frequently misunderstood as speaking in a nihilistic way, as though he's talking about the annihilation of an existing being. And he says, I don't. I talk about one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. Those who say I talk about annihilation, or that enlightenment is the annihilation of an existing being, they misunderstand me, they misrepresent me. That's not what I'm saying. So that what we have to do, or this challenge of, say, reflecting on this place of non-abiding, is in a way to recognize, well, it's a place which is not really a place. It's like Nibbana is not a kind of super heaven. And the challenge is to let go of our habitual ways of thinking. And that's exactly what Vipassana meditation is for. It's to change the way that we see what we are. So on our ordinary worldly way of thinking, it's like, I am a body, I am a mind, I am a person, I am a man, I'm a woman, I'm old, I'm young, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm healthy, I'm sick. All these I ams. And in our documents, that's what they say. If you get to the border and you say, and they ask for your passport, you say, I am undefinable. That's it. Back on the plane, mate. Because at the immigration, actually now you just got to hand your passport to a machine. You sort of get it scanned by a machine. But you hand over your document, and the document's got the right number, 99247749. It's my passport number. You have a number, you got a name, you got a picture. Yes, those are the conventions. But the challenge, and what Vipassana meditation helps us to do, is to say, well, that's just a conventional designation. The fact that my passport number is 99247749, that's just because I've got that particular passport issued on the 28th of September 2011. Chunk, that's my number. When I get the next passport, it'll be a different number. So it's a conventional designation, that's all. So it's a bit of a leap to say, okay, I'm 99247749. Okay, that's the convention. But being a man, being a woman, being English, being Thai, being Sri Lankan, being Welsh, being British, not being European. These are a bit of a leap. But that's what Vipassana meditation is helping us to do: is to say, wait a minute, is that the whole story, or is that just a habitual way of seeing? So with this place of non-abiding, then, it's letting go of those narrow and limiting habits of self-view, and to see things in a different way. So I feel that advice that Luang Por Chah gave to Luang Por Sumedho was absolutely marvelous, because it works in every single situation. Whether it's talking about working with your mind when you're sitting on a cushion in the Dhamma hall, whether you're in a business meeting, whether you're talking to a lay person who's having problems in their family, whether you're talking to someone who wants to join the monastery or leave the monastery, it applies perfectly. You can't go forward, you can't go back, you can't stand still. As long as the mind is awake to the situation and attuned to the situation and not conceiving it in terms of self-view, then you find that you're able to respond. When it's time to move forward, there's forward movement. When it's time to move back, then there's backward movement. When it's time to be still, then there can be stillness, but the mind is not attaching or calling one any better than another. It's just the mind awake to the present reality and attuning and adapting. So that even though Ajahn Chah could say to that visitor, I don't have an age and I don't live anywhere, you might think, well, that sounds pretty spacey, you know. but that sounds like a bit too airy-fairy. But the way that Luang Por Chah operated, and you can be sure that the Buddha was very similar, that even though internally there was that recognition of not being identified with body or personality or time or space or location, there was an extraordinary attunement. And just looking at the Buddha's teachings and being around Ajahn Chah, there was an incredible, sensitivity to the time, the place, the situation, the people who he was with, and the different demands of many situations. There was an incredible adaptability. And when he needed to be quiet, he could be quiet. When he needed to speak up, he could speak up. When he needed to lead, he could lead. When he needed to follow, he could follow. And you find exactly that same spirit in the Buddha's teaching. So if we think about our place in the world, like who we are, rather than updating your Instagram page, Instagram postings, or your who you are on Facebook, I would suggest steering the attention, and not that I'm kind of anti those things, but rather than putting too much investment in that your status in society, the role that you have, how you present yourself, to be sustaining this skillful attitude, this quality of not identifying with the body or the personality, to take that advice that Luang Por Chah gave to Luang Por Sumedho. The Buddha Dhamma is not to be found in moving forwards, nor in moving backwards, nor in standing still. Just because things are going well doesn't mean to say that progress is being made. Just because things are falling apart doesn't mean to say that that's bad. Just because things seem to be stuck, that doesn't need to be something particularly significant either. That's how we tend to read our lives. But rather to develop the meditation, to develop the quality of insight, so that we are changing the way we see what we are, learning to develop that insight that recognizes the body is not self, feelings are not self, perceptions are not self, thoughts and emotions, ideas and opinions, these are not self, these are not who and what we are. This story, the narrative that we tell of who we are, that's just a story, a collection of ideas and images. That's all. It doesn't have to be anything that we are attached to or identified with or limited by. So I strongly encourage that development of insight meditation. This is the most powerful and direct tool that we have, even though it does have the effect of deposing what Ajahn Sucitto called the inner tyrant, unseating the inner tyrant. There's maybe a few copies of Ajahn Sucitto's book. Unseating the inner tyrant. So the ego, the I, me, mine, that ahankara, mamankara, that's the inner tyrant that says, I am this way, I should be that way, you should be this way, you should be that way. That the inner tyrant does get removed from office, gets deposed, and so that is a change in perspective. But what replaces that ego and the self-centered thinking as the driving force for our life is mindfulness and wisdom. So one of the so in terms of letting go of the identification with the body, with the personality, with our appearance, with our age, our nationality, our status, our occupation, and so forth, then if we want a focus in our life, then the Buddha points to the skillful qualities that can be developed. So particularly mindfulness and wisdom, satipanya. If that's in the driving seat, if that's what is used to guide this life, then that will bring a lot more benefit and harmony between ourselves and others. But also, there's different teachings where the Buddha spells it out in more detail. Okay, how do we live as a well-rounded person? If you want to apply mindfulness and wisdom in the different dimensions of our life, how do we do that? So just to share with you finally, in terms of not so much as a place to live, a thing to be, but rather to see ways that we can strengthen that aspect of mindfulness and wisdom being what is the guiding force for this life. So the Buddha spoke about a collection of 7 qualities that comprise what is called a good person, or a well-rounded person, a sapurisa. Sat means good or true or valuable. Purisa is a person, so sapurisa. So this is in a way how to develop the reflective quality of the mind, how to say strengthen mindfulness and wisdom. So the first of these 7 is dhammanyutta, looking at the causes of things, where things come from, looking at and contemplating the origins of things, where things have come from. So dhammanyutta is the first one. The second one is attanyutta, A-T-T-H, attanyutta. So looking at the results, or where things go, what are the effects. So looking at causes of how things have come to be the way they are, contemplating effects, looking at where things are going or where they have gone. So those two work as a pair, dhammanyutta and attanyutta. So then the third one is also attanyutta, but without an H. So that's the atta, which is yourself. So knowing your own personality. Are you talkative, like me? Or are you quiet, like other people? Are you a mathematical type? Are you an artistic type? Are you a spacey type? Are you a refined detail type? What are you? Are you comfortable with lots of people? Are you uncomfortable with lots of people? Do you like to be with your family? Can you not stand your family? What is the shape of your personality? So getting to know how you work and what is problematic, what's difficult, and so forth. So getting to know your own character. The fourth one is matanyutta. Matanyutta means knowing the right amount. So like when you're eating food. So here having a banquet every not just on the weekends. It's kind of, we're ascetics. We only have one banquet a day, So so it can be a challenge with lots and lots of delicious food being offered to take more than you really need. So matanyutta is knowing the right amount. But with food, also with conversation, with seeking distraction, with shopping. How much is the right amount when your credit card says you're maxed out? So knowing the right amount, matanyutta, is getting to know your own capacity and what's useful for you, what works, and not just in your own life, but also in the work that you do. So knowing the right amount. Then the next one is kalanyutta. Kala is time, to knowing the right time. So is it the time to get up and leave, or is it the time to sit quiet and be still? So it's now 5 to 3, so this is not the time to get up and go and make the tea. In 5 minutes' time, it will be the time to get up. So kalanyutta is knowing the right time. Knowing the right time to say something, knowing the right time to be quiet, knowing the right time to crack a joke, or knowing the right time to be serious. So the knowing the the timing of things. Ripeness is all, as Shakespeare put it. And then the last two are knowing other people's personalities. So Pugalanyuta. So who are you talking to? Are you talking to a 3-year-old? Are you talking to a 93-year-old? Are you in a Dhamma assembly? Are you sitting down with your family for breakfast? Where are you? Are you in a train station? Are you in a meditation hall? Where are you? What's the situation? Who are you talking to? And so that these last two kind of work together. So Pugalanyuta is knowing individuals, and the last one, the seventh one, is Parisanyuta, knowing the group that you're with. So that it's like reflecting on, okay, who am I with? What's the relationship between me and this other individual, or what's this group that I'm together with? Am I in the workplace? Am I with the family? Am I in a monastery? Where am I? So all of these 7, and this is a lot of detail, but I wanted to share these. I feel these are good qualities to bear in mind if we want to give a direction for our life, and we want to have some structure to be clearly laying out helpful directions, rather than I should be this way, I shouldn't be that way, but to at least spell out the kind of qualities that help us to be a well-rounded individual, to function skillfully in our human society. Then these are qualities that are really helpful to bear in mind, and so that whilst letting go of self-view, letting go of conceit, freeing the heart from that, what you find is that the more that there is letting go of self-concern, self-view, then these other modes of operating, they function quite naturally and freely. You don't have to be thinking, okay, 2 units of Kalanyuta and 5 of Matanyuta and about 10 of the Pugalanyuta. It's not a calculation, but the more that the heart is really free of self-view and is attuned to the time, the place, the situation, then that those qualities will rise up and take shape on their own.
I was thinking whether you could offer any guidance on discerning. It's about being aware of what is the natural responsivity of the heart and the attunement of the heart, and what is meanness, minus, and I-ness. And if there's, in my experience, sometimes I'm not clear with that. Where to distinguish that?
That's a very good question, if only we got a little readout, maybe in the future with augmented reality we'll have little kind of digital readouts in the bottom of our eyes that'll tell us, delusion, drop it, or this is wisdom, follow it. But for the time being, we have to rely on mindfulness, really, and it's one of the reasons why we meditate and watch the mind for hours and hours and hours. It's like learning a language. You can't really, if you want to learn Chinese or French or Thai or a foreign language, you've got to keep hearing it over and over and over. Otherwise, you can't tell the difference between the nuances of accent and the way the particular letters or syllables are pronounced. You have to keep hearing it, and then you can replicate it. So it's really exactly the same in terms of the mind, and so we maybe experience an attitude like, "Oh, this looks like a good way forward," and say, well, is that wisdom, or is that me saying, "I want that"? And so a lot of the time we can't tell because it's not clear. So you can't tell the tone. It's like in Thai language, it's a tonal language, so that the words cow and cow are not the word for an animal with 4 legs. It might sound the same to us in English, but it can mean rice, mountain, 9, white, enter. And it all sounds like cow. But they're 5 different words. So that endlessly repeated hours of meditation watching, and then in a sense you get to know the flavor, you get to know the texture of that eye making and mind making. And part of the way that familiarity is developed is using the capacity for wise reflection to ask, where's this coming from, or is this being driven by self-interest or self-view, or is this natural attunement of the heart? What's going on here? And wise reflection is not just a sort of chattering thought, but it's like a deliberate, focused inquiry, if you like. It's something that's quite specific. You're bringing the attention to an experience and consciously exploring it, examining it, like sort of picking up. Okay, what's this thing? It's a glass. Okay, so how much does it weigh? You're specifically picking that attitude up and exploring it, and then also being prepared to be wrong, as it were. Say, well, this seems like wisdom. I'm not 100% sure. Let's follow this and see what happens. And so part of not being attached to views, to the ditthi, is that rather than I'm right, that's and you're wrong, or this is I've chosen this, therefore it's good, and then I'm hoping it's going to be right, and I'm afraid it's going to be wrong, because if self-view gets attached to choice, then again it gets tied into the attitudes of hoping and fearing. But if choice is guided by wisdom, then it's much more like, let's try this and see where it goes. And if it has a pleasant and helpful result, rather than yes, I got it right, I'm a success, it's like, well, that looks like it's heading in a good direction. Okay, duly noted. Let's keep heading this way and see what happens. Or similarly, if it's really painful and difficult and it leads to a real conflict or a mess, you go, okay, well, that didn't work. Rather than I'm a failure, I got that wrong, I hope they don't find out, what will they think of me? Just to, in a sense, recognizing, well, that led to a place of confusion and dukkha, so let's not go that way. So duly noted. So the whole way that the mind relates to success and failure is quite different. So that you're letting the choices or the judgment that are made really be informed by wisdom along the way as well. If that makes sense. And then, but as I said, being prepared to be wrong. Like, okay, well, this feels like a good direction to go. Let's try this. And then, a week later, you realize that was definitely not the right. That was not the right choice. Okay, duly noted. Now. Let's try a different direction, and so then you're training the heart to develop wisdom and to also at that time you recognize, okay, well that was I didn't recognize that element of self-view in it, so it can be like that. That's part of its texture. It smells like that. It tastes like that. That's the feel of it. So it's like learning to recognize the sound of a rising tone or a rolled R in French or something, that you are okay. That's how you make that sound. Okay, that's what it's supposed to sound like. Okay, I think I'm getting that. And then that over time, that familiarity really sinks in, and you become more and more able to recognize, oh, I know you. So in the suttas, you have this dialogues between the Buddha and Mara. And then the Buddha frequently says, I know you, Mara. I know you, evil one. Like Mara will come along and try to trick the Buddha, and the Buddha immediately says, I know you, Mara. I know you, evil one. He knows that sound. He knows that texture. Okay, I know where this is coming from. There's no doubt. So that's in a sense the challenge is to develop that clarity of wisdom and attunement, so that those deluded motivations get recognized more and more quickly, and then let go of more and more quickly. Because you might recognize them, but still, I know I should let go, but not yet. So, any other questions? Yes.
My question, got a two-part question. The woman that didn't want to move her plants, or if I come across somebody else who has this NIMBY attitude, do you have any thoughts or advice on that?
Well, be mindful. Because like with that particular encounter, I tried to make my input, and she invited me to her home, and she saw me as a teacher, and so I'd made the input a couple of times, and I said, "Well, surely wouldn't it be easier to just move your plants?" And then the response that she gave was like, "No, I shouldn't have to do that. That's I'm within my rights to have them where I want them." And so then reading that situation, it's okay. I said it twice over, and she's determined to hang on to that. Okay, I've said my bit. She certainly understood what I've said. I can't think of anything else to say. Okay, it's up to her. So that in those situations, weighing it up, what's your relationship? And like I was saying about the sapurisa, what's your relationship to the person? Is it your brother? Is it your dad? Your mother? Is it someone in the workplace? Is it someone who is a kind of an old college friend or something? Who are they? What's your relationship to them? How do they see you? And weighing up those things, and then also weighing up to what degree are they asking me to give them advice about their life. Because it could be that, yes, you're my friend, but no, I'm not interested in anything you want to tell me to do. So that quality of pugalanyuta, knowing people, kind of weighing up who they are and the time, the place, the situation. And because sometimes it might be that if you're like in a live situation, it's the wrong moment to say anything. But then when things have sort of calmed down or later on, he said, when we had that kind of interaction, it came into my mind to suggest such and such. I didn't say it at the time, but I thought I'd let you know that's what I was thinking. Does that sound okay to you, or is that upsetting? And so you can check in later on. But really, it's a matter of attuning to who the person is, what the relationship is, what the time is, the situation. And part of the Buddhist way is like not sort of wading into somebody else's life without being invited. So that you are, at least that's within our monastic training in particular, but I think it's also as a general principle that we're not going around telling everybody how they ought to live, but rather just trying to embody a good way to live, a good way to operate, good attitudes, and let that speak for itself. So we're not knocking on people's doors telling them how to straighten out their lives. So that element of somebody asking for your input, or if you're engaged, you're talking about that area of conversation, you're having a discussion about it. You say, okay, well, the way it seems to me is, so you can talk about it in terms of how you feel it to be, rather than you should do this. That make sense?
Yeah, actually, that makes sense. Yeah.
So that you can. So sometimes to say, well, if it was me in this situation, what I would do is X, Y, or Z. So then they can pick that up or not. So there's ways you can talk about things that are not just sort of you should be this way or you should do that.
Yeah, because he said you would move the plants from there to there, didn't you?
I said, have you considered?
Oh yes, I think you said it. Yeah.
Moving the plants to the other side of the garden. That was the immediate. There must be some special reason why she doesn't do that, because that seemed like the most obvious thing to do. The shadow is there on the right-hand side. That's the tree. There's the shadow. There's an empty space on the left-hand side. So I just wanted to find out what was the reason. But then the reason was she wanted them over there, not over there.
Did you ever hear an outcome of the lawsuit, or was it just too personal?
I don't think I ever heard an outcome.
And then you mentioned Mara. When I was here last time, someone mentioned other voices. Those guardians, Hiri Ottapa. Are they similar things like Mara to guide us to be aware of others, and that's, or am I getting it all wrong?
No, well, they're more psychological qualities.
Oh.
So these are all different ways of speaking about attributes of your own mind. And so Hiri and Ottapa are almost always just spoken about as mental qualities. Very, very rarely are they actually sort of depicted in any kind of mythological form. Our temple is a rare example. There's two devas on either side of the doors as you go in. Not those two. In the temple, you got one with a blue surrounding and one with a pink surrounding. So those represent Hiri and Ottapa. But that's extremely rare. So usually they're just spoken of as the mental qualities of moral sensitivity. So when you tell a lie, that sort of in your heart, that wasn't really true. Or, that feeling of regret and tightness, that sort of painfulness in the heart, that kind of moral sensitivity is. So then that's usually how they are represented in the teachings and talked about. And Mara is more often mythologized as a sort of entity, but it's also a way of talking about the deluded patterns of thinking and deluded attitudes, anything that's clouded by ignorance. You can speak in terms of the voice of Mara, or being it's just Mara having its effect on the mind. But it's so anything that attitudes that are clouded by ignorance, so greed, hatred, delusion, all these aspects of self-interest, I and me and mine, they would mostly in the suttas they're talked about in terms of psychological qualities, but also you have these dialogues between the Buddha and Mara coming along and saying, if you wanted to, you could turn the whole Himalayas into solid gold. If you could do that. And so that's mythologized into like an entity coming along to the Buddha and speaking to him, but you can also see it as the thought arising in the Buddha's mind. I could turn the whole Himalayas into solid gold if I wanted to. And so the representation of Mara as a living being, as an entity, is more common in the suttas. But in terms of our moment-by-moment experience, then any of those attitudes of mind that are coloured by self-view and ignorance and such like greed, hatred, and delusion, that they consider those all the voices of Mara.
And you were just saying that through meditation we can be more sensitive to and observe Mara and that texture. Is that the gist that you were saying just now?
Yeah, so that you rather like that. So you could turn the whole Himalayas into solid gold if you wanted to. It's like you don't have to sit here and watch your mind. I mean, just go out and enjoy the countryside. It's a beautiful day. Look, the sun's coming out. Why are you wasting your time? Then it's like the wisdom would tend to say, "I know you, Mara."
And then I'll finish on, and the moral sensitivity is just instinctive; it just happens. Is that?
It just happens. It's also, it's an attribute of the human heart, and one of the interesting things with it is that the more spiritually developed any individual is, and the stronger those feelings are. But it's not the same as guilt. It's like a moral sensitivity, so that it's painful, but it's not connected to self-view, like I'm a terrible person or I'm really awful, I should be punished. That's where like the self-view has taken over Hiriyottapa and turned it into a guilt trip. And so in Buddhist psychology, to have a lot of Hiriyottapa is a really good sign. It's like someone who's really spiritually mature has a lot of Hiriyottapa, which means and it's in some of the teachings it said how there are things an arahant actually cannot do. Like if you're an enlightened being, you cannot tell a lie. It's like the tongue won't form the words. You can't kill a living creature. It's like it's impossible. It kind of the hand can't act to take the life of another living being. It won't work. Right. So the Hiriyottapa is really sort of cranked up to max, so that it's very, very different from the sort of Western guilt tripping that the Judeo-Christian mindset of you're a bad person, you should be punished, you're evil, but rather it's in a way the heart is acutely attuned to anything that's unskillful or harmful, and so that so hiri is they're talked about in different ways, but hiri is generally reflecting on your own actions. So like if you told a lie or you've harmed another creature, then that sense of the painfulness in you. Ottappa is talked about in different ways, but generally I think it's most helpful to understand it as when you see unskillful action outside yourself. It's like when you see somebody else acting cruelly or selfishly or aggressively, or it's a sense of, I don't want to be around that. I don't want to be close to that. It's not that you're not filled with hatred or aversion. It's just as a withdrawing. I'm not interested in being close to that. Why would I want to be near that? That's sort of painful. It's chaotic. It's confusing. It's just there's an inclining away from that, so that the one is more related inwardly and the other is more related outwardly. But it's they are that sense of an attunement to the impact of actions and speech.
I'll just finish, and they just automatically get bigger as you become more enlightened. Is that what you're saying?
That's roughly it. Yes.
Right, thank you.
So, any other questions relating to today's theme? Not in my backyard and the place of non-abiding. There's a hand at the back. Oh, go ahead. Yes, you're close by. Yeah.
I hope it's a quick one. When you have a situation that you can't escape of NIMBY, or not in my backyard, but meaning is something really uncomfortable, what can you do? You can't just stay in this no abiding place where you're just nothing. So it's a practical ask for advice. For instance, if you happen to have a close friend or somebody, member of your family, or a situation where it's really close to you, you can't avoid it. Mm-hmm. And so you find like dealing with confusion, aggressivity, of all this type of energy, mm-hmm. or of virtue, or whatever you call them. You can't stay in this place of numbness, and so what do you do?
Well, I think it's a. Oh, sorry.
Is it clear enough? Or
yes.
Okay.
I think there's a misunderstanding. The place of non-abiding is not a place of non-action. So it's like Ajahn Chah saying to Ajahn Sumedha, it's not in the Buddha Dhamma is not found in moving forwards, nor in moving backwards, nor in standing still. So it's not a matter of doing nothing. It's not a passivity, but rather it's an attunement of the heart, the mind to the present situation. And it's like Ajahn Sumedha did a lot of choosing and took a lot of initiative establishing the Sangha in the West. He had to give a lot of direction and a huge amount of teachings and make a lot of choices. Yeah, Amaravati, this is one of his choices. This place only exists because he says, I think we need a bigger place. So that not moving forwards, not moving backwards, not standing still is absolutely not passivity. So if you've got a difficult conflict and something seems to need to be done, then this place of non-abiding is talking about how the mind is trying to find a thing that I should be doing, or to take hold of it and drive it towards a particular goal because I know that's right. And so, that's the kind of thing we do all the time. And so then the alternative that Ajahn Chah's advice is talking about is not being rigid or being fixed in the outcome that we want, or how are we going to handle this, or we need to talk to the police, or we need to get a lawyer, or you need to talk to Uncle Joe and I'm going to arrange the meeting. And it's like, well, yes, it seems like Uncle Joe needs to be talked to, but let's find out more about the situation, or this seems to need a lawyer, but let's get a bigger picture. Let's look at the whole situation. So it's not a matter of being half-hearted or passive, but rather not acting out of compulsion or in an automatic way, or not just reacting according to ways that you've done in the past, or because someone with a loud voice or with a logical mind is telling you should do this, and you go, oh, okay. But rather, it's that attunement to the situation. And then also, it's kind of interesting that this sort of letting go or non-attachment, it can actually enable us to act in far more comprehensive ways, to be far more brave and take more risks than we would normally do, even though we might call it non-attachment. Do you see what I mean? It's because part of what you're not attaching to is your hesitancy. You might think, oh, I better not do anything, or it's a bit risky, or what will they think, or oh, I'm not sure about that. But if there's non-attachment, if there's coming from a place of attunement, it's like, then it can be some really difficult situation, but it's, well, okay, something needs to be done, and no one else is doing it, okay, I'll do it. And then you find yourself taking responsibility, or stepping up and getting really engaged and really involved in something. But that involvement has come from non-attachment. So it's tricky using language in this way, because it seems like the Buddha being misunderstood to say, it sounded like he was talking about Nibbana as an annihilation. He said, that's not what I'm teaching. So the place of non-abiding is not being half-hearted or passive or just sort of disconnected. It's when you see people like Luang Por Sumedho or Luang Por Chah in action, they are very connected and often ready to take initiative and to be very forthright, very straightforward in ways, but they're doing it without any kind of ego involvement, or without any sort of fixed view of where it's got to go, but they're weighing up the whole situation and then being ready to act upon it. And so it's a way of not being rigid or acting out of habit or out of opinion or social pressure, but rather training the heart to attune, to be in tune with the time, the place, the situation, who you're with, what the situation demands, and then saying, okay, let's go for it. So it's a simple example. When I came here in 2010, and Luang Por Sumedho had invited me to take over as abbot of Amaravati. I was living in California. I was very happily settled in my place. I had the perfect kuti, looking out over the valley, up on this hillside. You could see the sun and the moon and the stars, and alone in the forest, ensuite bathroom. 280 acres of forest all around. It's like, yes. Dream kuti. And But I've forgotten the Buddha's encouragement in the Dhammapada. The wise exert themselves; they are not attached to any home. Like swans that abandon the lake, they leave home after home behind. So just after I got the perfect kuti, myself and Ajahn Pasano, we had this pair of perfect kutis, and then I got this invitation from Lumpur Sameto, would you like to come and take over as abbot at Amaravati? So I had to discuss that with the Sangha there in Abhayagiri in California, and then with other Sangha members, and everyone eventually agreed. And so I moved over here in 2010. So I'd lived here before, 1985 to 1995. And I knew then that these buildings were built in 1939, and I spent a lot of time with everybody else insulating them and patching them up. And so I had assumed that while I was away, 15 years away, that there had been a plan had been developed to take down all the old buildings and replace them with purpose-built new buildings. That they must have some sort of long-term plan. They must have done. And even though I visited from time to time in those 15 years, it had never really been talked about, but I just kind of assumed there would be a long-term plan for taking down these old energy inefficient buildings and creating a new design. So when I arrived here, it's a big place and a complex community, and there's already a lot to be doing. And so, and before I came, I mean, this might seem extremely stupid, but it had not crossed my mind once before I actually arrived here that we might actually need to to be launching a rebuilding program. I assumed it was already in place. I arrived here and I found out it's not. There is no plan. Okay. So I was not looking for anything more to be doing. I already had plenty of things to occupy my time. But within a year of arriving here, I realized, okay, well, these buildings are now 75 years old, and they're extremely inefficient, and if there isn't a long-term plan, we need to create one. Okay. Well, no one else is going to do it. I'm sitting behind the wheel. So, okay, I guess I have to do it. So that's one example of non-abiding. If I had said, I've already got too much to do, the buildings look after themselves, we can just pay the bills and just let the buildings stand there till they fall apart. And, I could have done that, but weighing the picture up and realizing, well, I was a bit naive to assume there was already a long-term plan. But considering it, I think, well, I guess it's just been put off and put off and put off, and I talked about it with various other people, and okay, well, it looks like people feel this is something necessary, and I'm sitting in the driver's seat, so okay, I guess I'll launch a long-term plan. So that's a lot of meetings. I mean, huge amounts of documents, piles and piles and piles of documents and meetings, and huge amounts of money. And so that is a lot of engagement, and also taking a lot of initiative, having to give direction and be involved and listen to people's input and deal with conflict between architects and builders and whatnot. But I'd say that's all part of the place of non-abiding. It can involve a lot of stuff. But given the place and given the situation of myself being invited to be in charge and the living situation here, that's how it took shape. So that you can, I'm not saying all my decisions or that was 100% perfect in any way, but as an example, you can practice non-attachment, and for that to lead to an awful lot of stuff with your name on. But that doesn't have to be a burden. So if I feel like I've got to make this long-term plan work, It's all down to me, and if it succeeds, I will be happy. If it doesn't succeed, I won't be happy. It's got to be like this, it mustn't be like that. Then I'm creating suffering. That even just saying those words, I'm kind of just making it up as I'm saying it. Even just saying those words, you get this, because that's a really unskillful attitude. If I have the attitude, okay, well, it seems like a good idea, and people seem to be behind it, and it seems to be developing in a good way. Okay, let's just put energy and time and effort into it, and if it comes out with a good result, great. If it doesn't, well, that's okay too. My happiness is not tied into what buildings take shape on this piece of ground over the next 100 years or so. It doesn't have to be how I define who and what I am, or what is valuable.
Thank you for the example. So it seems that, or at least to me, that non-attachment could be a helping hand on the way.
Absolutely, yeah. It's frequently misunderstood as meaning passivity or disconnection, but I would say the being abbot of Amaravati is my practice of non-attachment. So, and people say, oh, you must be so busy. You've got so much to do. All these people, all this stuff, and so I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but I say I try never to be busy. I'm very active, but I try never to be busy. To be busy is, to me, it depends how you use the English words. But to be busy is like you're just sort of you're grasping what's going on. There's a tension. There's an agitation. And you're waiting for it to be over so you can have some peace. But you can be active. And I really take my example from people like Lumpur Sumedho, Lumpur Cha, and the Buddha. They were very active people, but they're also extremely peaceful. They did a lot of stuff. The Buddha is incredibly creative and took an amazing amount of initiative, establishing the teaching and the whole Sangha and traveling all over northeast India and spreading the teachings in this kind of incredible variety of ways. It's an amazing amount of engagement and initiative. And if you read the Vinaya discipline, the books of the Vinaya, the monks and nuns were not very well behaved. I mean, there's like thousands of rules he had to establish because of the really awful things that the monks and nuns did. Incredibly stupid and indulgent and crazy, weird. And so, the Buddha had to establish all sorts of rules. So it wasn't all just plain sailing. It wasn't like he's the enlightened one and everyone says "Sadhu Bhante." He had to pass rules like it's an ajahn should not cut the ears off a novice simply to punish him for bad behavior. Not to be done. Okay. It's one extreme example, but so it was not easy. He had a huge amount of stuff to do, and adjudicating the conflicts in the community, or establishing different places, dealing with squabbling groups of lay people, and so on. He was amazingly creative and thoughtful, but yet he didn't create suffering about any of it. So we have really great examples of how to be active but not busy, and so that non-attachment is in a way freeing up your capacity to act so that you can use the abilities, the time, the energy, the capacities that you have in the most complete way possible, and it's restful along the way. So. There's a hand at the back earlier on. Maybe they were just...
So questions been answered.
Okay. There's one down in the corner here. This gentleman with the blue shirt. Last one. Down there.
You mentioned as one of the qualities of a balanced person, atinita, so some sense of right appreciation of a person or a self.
So atanyuta. Yeah.
Atanyuta, yeah. And then you mentioned about letting go of a sense of self. And I just wondered if you could say something about that, the compatibility of that with karma, which seems to require some connection between a person now and a person in the past and a person in the future, and also its compatibility or how it fits in with rebirth, which again seems to presuppose a connection between a person in this life and a person in a future life.
There's a few elements in there. One of the things that is helpful to reflect on is that when we talk about letting go of self-view, it doesn't mean that personality evaporates. And so if you've been around various different Buddhist teachers, or just looking at the scriptures, that Venerable Mahakassapa was a very different character than Venerable Ananda. Mahakassapa was the sort of staunch ascetic and loved his rag robes and was very fond of the austere practices. And Ananda was like the perfect secretary that was sort of always looking after the Buddha's program and taking care of all his visitors. And so even in the Buddha's time, the great enlightened ones had very different personalities. So letting go of self-view doesn't mean the personality vanishes. So part of atanyuta is getting to know what shape the personality is. Like what's the prescription for your glasses? What size are your shoes? That kind of thing. So knowing, okay, I'm going to be in a large group of people. I tend to get anxious if there's a lot of people around. Okay, cater for that. Or I'm going to be by myself. I get lonely. I get insecure if I'm by myself. Okay, let's cater for that. So that you're getting to know the shape of your own disposition, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, where you've upset people in the past, where you've pleased people in the past, so that you're becoming familiar with that. It's like people, when people say with these Sunday talks or running a retreat, that they say, is it hard work for you, or do you feel it's stressful? You're running a retreat or giving these talks, and I say, well, I've never run out of words yet. Usually, I'm trying to limit the flow, so I don't worry about not having anything to say. And so, for other people, it's totally different. That running a retreat, it's really daunting. Oh my goodness, what am I going to say? 10 days. What's there to talk about? And so it's not saying talking a lot is good and not having much to say is bad, but rather, okay, you're talkative, or that you're taciturn, you're quiet, you're a person of few words. So you cater for that. And then how that relates to your conditioning or your past lives, then that's just in a way the choices that have been made in the past, the conditioning that we have just within this life, in our family, our education, who your siblings were, your sisters, your brothers, the vast array of different influences that come to play in our lives is incalculable. I mean, one of the four imponderables the Buddha spoke about is the workings of karma, the achinteya, the four imponderables that if you can't think your way to any certain conclusion about any of those areas. So karma is one of those. You can't figure out exactly where every karmic influence is karma and how everything affects everything else. It's too multidimensional. It's too multifaceted, too big. So in practical terms, I encourage people not to think about it too much. Say, okay, where does this come from? Okay, I'm a talkative person. Okay. It doesn't seem to come either from my mother or my father. I don't know where it comes from, but here it is. It's like this. I don't have to make a big story about it, but just know, well, this is a particular shape of this personality. So that the rule of thumb that I like to encourage is that if you ask the question, where does this come from? And then there's an immediate, sort of intuitive, oh, right, I'm very fear conditioned because when I was a small child, I was 1.5 years old, I was in hospital for 6 months, and I felt terribly lonely and lost and away from my family, and I was terrified I was never going to be with my mother again. I'm just making this up. So. And so I've got this fear of separation because when I was a small child. And so if that's sort of, that's where that's come from. And if it's immediate and uncluttered, then you can usually rely on that. Exactly why you got diphtheria and went to hospital for 6 months might be some kind of distant past life experience or not, but that I feel is not so crucial. But if there's an immediate sense, okay, well, wherever it came from, that experience when I was a little kid, that had this big effect on me now, so that the feeling of fear of being alone, the smell of a hospital, it brings an immediate reaction. That's probably conditioned by that. That's the cause, that's the effect. Okay. And the point of that is not to create a sense of identity, but rather, here's the cause, here's the effect. Okay, it's just nature doing its thing. And actually, as I'm giving that example, I'm remembering one of the places where it came from was somebody who was on a retreat with me here at Amaravati many years ago. That actually did happen to him. He was sent to hospital as a kid for, I think, actually even longer. I think it was about 9 months. And he was a psychotherapist by profession, and he was saying how I was teaching this meditation on not self and using the question, who am I? And along with other practices, and he said everything he did kept taking him back to this hospital experience when he was a very small child. He said, even the question, who am I? He said, so he was kind of interested in giving me this account. He said, so I think the words "who am I." So then the I is the upright, and then with a bar on top and a bar below. Then it flips around onto its side, turns into a pair of double doors, and I'm in the hospital corridor again. It's like I can't get out of that damn hospital. And he was laughing about it. He's saying, "Oh yeah, everything's taking me back to that experience as a child, and that had this massive impact, and that so that has coloured the way he would relate to his life." And so but we had this interesting discussion about how it was the word "I" turned into these hospital doors in the corridor. That I feeling is centered around that terrible difficulty as a child, separated from the family at such a young age, and the sights and the smell and the tone of that had that strong impact. So seeing that, okay, that's where that comes from. This is the cause, this is the effect. Aha. So then when we are able to see, it's a pattern of nature, it's not personal. Because of this cause, there's this effect. This is how nature works. So then there's the mind is able to see it in terms of Dhamma, in terms of the workings of nature, rather than me and my problem, my life, my thing. It's shifting from a self-centered view to a nature-centered view. And so that in the development of the quality of upekkha, equanimity, the way the Buddha encourages that is, I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So the development of upekkha, equanimity, comes from reflecting on cause and effect. Here's the cause, here's the effect. Seeing it in terms of nature, so that leads to this evenness. Sort of, oh right, okay. It might be a painful result, but it's just nature doing its thing. Or it might be a glorious result, but it's just nature doing its thing. Aha. I don't have to make that glorious result me and look at me, I'm wonderful, how fantastic I am. I did this thing and got praised. Okay, well, that's a particular skill. It got acted on, and so there's this result. The world praises it. Fine. This is acted on. This is painful and difficult. That has that particular tone and feeling. Okay, that's the cause. That's the effect. So the more the mind, the usefulness of that then is looking at those influences on this life that have made it in this particular way, so that it can be seen from a position of not self. It can be seen in terms of nature rather than I and me and mine. I think that's a good place to finish. So thank you all for your good questions and your attention.